What happens when compassion meets power, but only one of them is allowed to matter? The rain had been falling for hours, not in soft patters, but in relentless, icy sheets that hammered the pavement and flooded the cracked sidewalks of East Lexington. Neon signs flickered, their glow distorted through the water streaming down windows like tears the city refused to shed. It was nearly midnight, the kind of hour when the world either slept or turned its back. Inside the dim glow of a nearly empty diner, a woman with weary eyes and skin the color of polished cedar was wiping down the counter for the final time that night. Alicia Monroe, 39, had just finished a 12-hour shift at Lenny's Diner, a place where the floor creaked with every step, and the smell of burnt coffee had long since embedded itself in the walls. Her legs ached, her apron was damp with sweat, but still, she moved with intention, dignity, and a quiet fire that refused to go out. She didn't notice him at first, not until a gust of wind shoved the diner door and her eyes were drawn to the shadow just beyond the neon sign. There, on the corner of the rain-slicked sidewalk, sat a boy in a wheelchair, barely 10 years old by the look of him, his thin frame hunched forward beneath a threadbare jacket, soaked through and clinging to his skin. His fingers clutched a fraying blanket, doing little to shield him from the cold. His dark hair was plastered to his pale forehead. The boy didn't move. He simply sat there, alone in the storm. Alicia froze. There was something about the way he didn't cry, didn't call out, just endured. She set her cleaning rag aside and pushed the door open. The rain slapped her face like a rebuke, cold and uncaring. "Hey, sweetheart," she said softly, crouching beside him. "What are you doing out here by yourself?" The boy startled at her voice, his blue eyes lifting in alarm before softening into confusion. "I'm waiting for my dad," he said, voice barely audible over the downpour. Alicia looked up and down the street. Empty. A pawnshop's flickering cash for gold sign was the only movement besides the hiss of tires cutting through puddles. She looked back at the boy, heart tightening. "Where is he, baby?" He shrugged, pulling the blanket closer. He said he'd be quick. Alicia's jaw clenched. She had seen this before, too many times. Kids left waiting, promises broken like old bones. "You can't stay out here," she said gently. "Come inside. It's warm, and I've got something special for you." He hesitated. Just a breath. Then he nodded. Alicia gripped the handles of his wheelchair and rolled him inside. The diner's warmth hit them like a hug. She guided him to a booth near the radiator, draped a towel over his shoulders, and crouched down. "I'm Alicia. What's your name, sweetheart?" "Micah," he murmured. She smiled. "That's a strong name." "You hungry?" He nodded. That was all she needed. In minutes, Alicia had toasted sourdough, layered golden cheese, and filled a bowl with steaming tomato soup. She set it in front of him like it was a feast. "This one's on me," she whispered, slipping a napkin into his lap. Mitya took his first bite, eyes wide in wonder. "This is the best thing I've ever had," he said, voice small but awed. Alicia laughed, but inside, her chest ached. She had seen too many kids like him, too small, too quiet, already carrying a weight they couldn't name. And what she didn't see, however, was what lay across the street. Inside a sleek, black Mercedes parked under a dying street lamp sat a man in a tailored charcoal coat. Edward Kane, 46, was the kind of man who didn't blink at seven-figure deals or dismantling entire departments with a single phone call. The founder and CEO of Kane Tech Global, he had made a career out of building systems that never allowed room for sentiment. And yet, here he was, watching, because Micah wasn't just a boy in the rain. He was Edward's son. The billionaire's jaw tightened. He had left Micah here for just a moment while he took a call with Tokyo investors. He hadn't expected this. He hadn't expected her. That woman, dark-skinned, tired, underpaid, was feeding his son like he was someone who mattered. Edward reached for his phone. "Natalie," he said when his assistant answered. "Get to Lenny's diner. No suits, no heels. 20 minutes." "Sir." "On everything on the woman who just fed my son." Then he hung up. Inside the diner, Micah was laughing now, soup on his chin. Alicia wiped it away with a napkin and a shake of her head. "Messy eater, huh?" Across the street, Edward's eyes never left them. Because in a world where every move was calculated, every exchange tallied, Alicia Monroe had just broken the rules. And Edward Kane was a man who did not like owing anyone anything. Before we continue, this story isn't just about a rainy night and a forgotten child. It's about how a single act of compassion can crack the armor of power. About how the smallest kindness can echo through boardrooms and change the lives of those who were never meant to be noticed. So, take a breath, grab a glass of water, sit somewhere quiet, and stay with us. Because what happens next, you won't want to miss. The warmth inside Lenny's diner wrapped around Micah like a woolen coat. Unfamiliar, yet desperately needed. Alicia wheeled him to the corner booth, the one closest to the old radiator that clicked and hissed with age, but still gave off a comforting heat. The diner was mostly empty now, except for the hum of the fridge, the buzz of the overhead light, and the fading strains of an old Aretha Franklin song playing from the crackling radio. Micah didn't say much. His tiny hands clutched the towel Alicia had wrapped around his shoulders, and even though his fingers were still trembling slightly from the cold, they no longer looked like frozen claws. She crouched beside him again, this time slower, taking in the way he sat, legs pulled slightly in, eyes flicking toward the door, as if expecting someone to rush in and yank him back out into the night. But no one came. "Micah, right?" she said gently. He nodded, lips pressed together, face pale under the fluorescent lights. Alicia had seen that look before. Kids trying to act older than they were, trying not to need, trying not to be a burden. It carved deep into her, the way some people's lives started heavy and never let up. She stood, pushing back a strand of damp hair from her face, and moved behind the counter. Bread, butter, cheese. Simple, deliberate movements. Grilled cheese wasn't fancy, but it was soul food, the kind that held memories. Her grandma used to say that when the world felt like it was trying to swallow you whole, you fight back with something warm and toasted. She sliced the sandwich in triangles, just like her grandma used to, because corners mattered to kids. Tomato soup simmered beside it, the scent of garlic and basil rising to meet her like a hug from the past. Alicia carried the tray back and set it before Micah. "Here you go, sweetheart." He looked at it like it was a treasure chest. He took the first bite and closed his eyes. Alicia watched the tension fall off his shoulders like a heavy jacket slipping to the floor. "This is the best thing I've ever had," he murmured, voice low and full of awe. Alicia smiled, but didn't reply. Instead, she sat on the opposite side of the booth, just close enough to make him feel not alone, but far enough to not make him feel caged. "You waiting long out there?" she asked softly. Micah nodded. "A while. He said he had a call." Alicia stiffened. "Your dad?" "Yeah." "Lead you there often?" Micah shrugged. "Sometimes. Depends on the meeting." Alicia exhaled through her nose, trying not to let the frustration show. She knew men like that. Knew them from news stories, from tipsy confessions over late-night coffees in the diner. Men who dressed power in suits, who walked past pain like it was invisible. But this boy, this sweet, hungry, polite boy, didn't deserve to be forgotten. "You cold?" she asked. Micah shook his head, even though his nose was pink and his hands still trembled. "Lee, she said with a gentle smile. "I'll get you another towel." She returned with another one, this one heated briefly in the kitchen microwave. When she draped it over him, Micah leaned into it just slightly, the way someone might lean into love without realizing. Outside, the storm was still raging, the rain coming down like punishment. Alicia caught her reflection in the window. Tired, yes, but alive in a way that surprised her. "You got any family close by?" she asked. "It's Dad. Mom, she died." Alicia's chest clenched. "How old are you, Micah?" 10, almost 11. That almost mattered. It always did at that age. "You've got a favorite subject in school?" "Science." "I like knowing how things work. Like how frogs breathe through their skin. That's weird, right?" Alicia chuckled. "Weird in a good way?" Micah grinned. A real one this time. It lit up his whole face. She let him eat in peace after that, refilling his water, bringing him extra napkins, watching him rediscover the simple joy of being treated with care. Across the street, Edward Kane hadn't moved. The rain drummed against the windshield of his Mercedes, the wipers steady and rhythmic, slicing away the distortion every few seconds. But it wasn't the weather he couldn't see through. It was his own reflection. He saw Micah's laughter. He saw Alicia. And something he didn't expect saw him back. It wasn't her eyes. She hadn't even looked his way. But it was in the way she saw his son. Not as a burden. Not as a tool. Just a boy. A child who mattered. And that made Alicia Monroe dangerous. Edward Kane didn't believe in charity. He believed in currency, in power, in control. And right now, he felt the uncomfortable weight of a debt he had never meant to owe. He reached for his phone. "Natalie," he said, his voice clipped. "Yes, Mr. Kane. I need you here. Lenny's diner. No suits, no heels. 20 minutes. Yes, sir. And Natalie, be discreet." "No, Miss Sutherland." Edward hung up and leaned back in his seat, jaw tight. Across the street, Micah finished his sandwich, cheeks full, eyes sleepy. Alicia wiped a bit of soup from his chin and said something. He laughed at it. Edward didn't hear it. But it stung. The sound of his son's laughter, unfamiliar and distant, stirred something cold and sharp inside him. 15 minutes later, a woman stepped into the diner, blonde hair tucked beneath a faded Orioles cap, sneakers damp from the rain. Her name was Natalie Griggs, but she introduced herself as Aunt Natalie. Alicia's eyes narrowed the moment she stepped in. Natalie smiled, too perfect. "Hey, chap," she said, crouching beside Micah. "Time to go." "But I didn't finish my milk," he replied, frowning. "You can take it with you. Dad's waiting." Alicia folded her arms. "Fuse, Aunt?" she asked, voice level but steel-laced. Natalie smiled tighter. "Yeah." She turned to Micah. "That true, baby?" Micah paused. Just a second too long. Alicia caught it. She crouched again beside him, voice gentler now. "You good, sweetheart? You want to go with her?" Micah looked between them, his knuckles white around his napkin. "She's here for my dad," he said, but his voice was quieter, less certain. Alicia wanted to push harder, wanted to say no. But she knew the rules. She knew the price of asking too many questions. She was a black woman in a broken system, and even now, in this moment, the danger didn't belong to Natalie. It belonged to her. Still, she didn't let him go empty-handed. She walked behind the counter, grabbed a chocolate chip cookie, wrapped it in wax paper, and pressed it into his hand. "For the road," she whispered. Micah smiled. "Thanks, Miss Alicia. You're the best." She watched as Natalie wheeled him toward the door, and just before they stepped into the rain, Natalie turned. She didn't say anything. What the look, cold, assessing, was enough. Outside, The black Mercedes flashed its lights. The door opened before Natalie knocked. Edward Kane stepped out, framed by the diner's glow. Natalie buckled Micah into the back seat, then turned to Edward. "She's sharp," she said. "Didn't buy the aunt story." Edward's expression didn't change. "But she let him go," Natalie added. "She didn't have a choice," he replied quietly. Natalie folded her arms. "Black woman, makes a scene. She'd be the one in trouble, not me." Edward nodded. "She's not like the others," Natalie said. He already knew that. He had watched Alicia step into the storm without flinching, had seen the way she spoke to Micah, like he was real, and that wasn't something Edward knew how to ignore. Before we enter the heart of this story, take a breath, because what just happened inside a rundown diner on Lexington Avenue, under rain, neon, and silence, was the start of a ripple. And that ripple is about to hit an empire. Find your quiet corner. Let the story carry you. We're just getting started. No one ever teaches you what to do when kindness writes a check you never asked to cash. The knock came long after Alicia had forgotten to expect it. It was past midnight now. The rain still murmured against the window panes of her third-floor walk-up on West Fayette, a sound that usually soothed her into sleep. But tonight it was like a metronome of something unfinished, something unsettled. She had just kicked off her worn sneakers, peeled off her damp socks, and lit the single cinnamon candle she allowed herself on hard weeks, which was most weeks, when she heard it. 3 deliberate taps against the door. Not frantic, not polite, just inevitable. Alicia froze, one hand on the counter where a chipped ceramic mug waited for cheap tea. She hadn't had visitors in months, and no one knocked on her door this late unless it meant trouble. She stepped lightly to the peephole, peered through. Her stomach dropped. There, standing in the hallway, soaked to the collar of his black wool coat, was the man from across the street. He didn't know his name. "Didn't you?" The suit spoke loud enough. Sharp jaw, steel gray eyes, shoes that somehow managed to remain spotless in the rain. He didn't belong here, not in this building, not on this side of Baltimore, not in her world. She didn't open the door. "Who is it?" she asked, voice tight. A pause. Then, "Edward Kane." The name landed like a brick in a still pond. "What do you want?" Another pause, the kind that made her skin crawl. Every instinct screamed no, but something else, stubbornness, curiosity, exhaustion, pried her hand toward the bolt. The door creaked open 2 inches, enough for a line of confrontation, not invitation. "I'll help me protect you from yourself," Plea said flatly. "No," he replied, his voice calm but coiled. "But you know my son." Silence stretched between them like a taut wire. She studied him now, really looked, the way he filled the doorway, the way the rain clung to his coat but not to his presence. Power walked in ahead of him like a herald. "Daniel," she said slowly, the name tasting different on her tongue now that it belonged to this man's world. He nodded once. "I was across the street last night," he said. The chill she'd carried in her bones since the diner suddenly turned sharp. "You were watching?" she asked, voice dropping. "I was." Alicia let out a dry, bitter breath. "So what? You here to complain that I fed your kid?" "No," he said, and this time something flickered in his voice. "I'm here because I don't believe in charity." He reached inside his coat, pulled out a thick envelope and placed it gently on her rickety kitchen table. She didn't move. "What is that?" she asked. "A job offer." She blinked. "And what?" He tilted his head, like testing how long her disbelief might last. "Holt Dynamics, 6 figures, benefits, relocation if necessary. Alicia laughed, short, sharp. You think I want to work for some rich white man who thinks handing out a check makes us even? Edward didn't flinch. I don't think you want charity, Miss Monroe. That's why I'm not offering it. Her name in his mouth was a surprise, like a door opening somewhere she never gave him a key to. She folded her arms. You don't even know me. I know enough, he replied. I know you fed my son without knowing who he was. I know you didn't treat him like he was broken. And I know how rare that is. His words knocked something loose inside her. A shard of memory, maybe. Something unguarded. He looked at the envelope. It sat on the table like it had always belonged there. And yet, it didn't. And what exactly would I be doing? She asked finally, her voice still laced with suspicion. Negotiation. Public relations. You're good with people. I need someone who doesn't flinch. She stared at him, trying to read between the spaces his suit didn't cover. You've got a building full of Ivy League suits who'd stab each other for a job like that. Exactly, he said. That's why I don't trust them. Silence again. But it was warmer now. Thicker. Alicia felt the envelope staring at her. It carried weight, more than just paper. Her mother's voice echoed in her head. Never owe these people anything, baby. They don't give without taking. She clenched her jaw. Why me? Edward Kane looked at her then, truly looked, and something in his gaze finally cracked, not with weakness, but with something more dangerous. Because you saw him, he said, voice low. Not my company, not my name. Him. Alicia's throat tightened. She glanced back at the envelope, then at the man, then again at her own trembling hands. Slowly she picked it up. I'll think about it, she murmured. Edward gave a single nod. Good. Then he turned, left the door open behind him like he knew she wouldn't close it right away. And she didn't. She stood there long after his footsteps faded, the envelope in her hands suddenly heavier than anything she'd ever carried. Because deep down, she already knew. She wasn't just thinking about it. She was going to say yes. As the door shut behind him, Alicia didn't move. She stood in the stillness, her body unmoving, but her eyes locked on the envelope like it might detonate. Then, without thinking, she walked to her small kitchen drawer, the one with the broken handle, and pulled out her grandmother's old cast-iron skillet, heavy, black, seasoned by decades of survival. She placed it on the stove. Then very slowly, she set the envelope on the countertop beside it. 2 paths, 1 choice, fire or future. And she stood there, hands trembling, staring down both. She whispered, barely above breath, Don't let it be the money that breaks you, Alicia. Let it be the truth. Sometimes the door to your future opens silently. So silently you almost miss the sound of yourself stepping through it. Alicia didn't sleep that night. Not really. She sat on her couch, too stiff to be a comfort, too familiar to be anything else, and stared at the envelope on her chipped coffee table. The cinnamon candle had burned down to a stub. The city was quiet. Her world was quiet. But her mind was a riot of thoughts, each one louder than the last. At 4:17 a.m. she made tea. At 5:03 she folded her only clean blazer into a plastic grocery bag so it wouldn't wrinkle on the way. By 6:10 she had washed her face 3 times, tied her curls back into the neatest bun she could manage, and slipped into her thrift store heels, one she hadn't worn since her last job interview, 4 years ago. She left her apartment at 6:45. Didn't look back. The city moved differently at dawn. Streets shimmered with last night's rain. Vendors unpacked crates of bruised fruit. Exhaust rose from manhole covers like steam off a wound. Alicia walked 6 blocks to the subway, shoulders squared, heart punching against her ribs like a protest. She was still wearing the same coat she'd had for 5 winters. It didn't fit anymore, but she held it closed anyway. When she emerged downtown, it was like crossing through a mirror. Everything here gleamed. Glass towers kissed the clouds. People didn't walk. They glided, their shoes silent, their stares practiced. No one carried plastic bags here. No one smelled like cinnamon candles and burnt toast. She stood across the street from Holt Dynamics, blinking up at its sheer size. 42 floors of power. And she was about to walk into all of it with nothing but a name and a memory of soup and kindness. The lobby was colder than outside. Polished marble floors, chrome everything. A receptionist who looked like she could end a war with just her nail polish. Alicia stepped in, chin high, even though every pair of eyes turned toward her like she'd tracked in mud. "Can I help you?" the receptionist asked, tone flat. "I'm here to see Edward Kane." That name, just 3 syllables, changed everything. The receptionist sat straighter, picked up a phone, whispered something too fast for Alicia to catch, then nodded once. "39th floor," she said. "Executive wing." The elevator moved like a breath, smooth, too quiet. Alicia watched the numbers climb. She felt the floors falling away beneath her like the years she'd fought just to stay upright. When the doors opened, it wasn't like arriving somewhere. It was like being seen. Edward Kane stood behind a desk so pristine it looked like it had never known paperwork. His back to the window. The skyline behind him. He didn't look up. "You're late," he said, still reading something. Alicia raised an eyebrow. "By 2 minutes." He finally glanced up. "That's 2 minutes I don't get back." She didn't flinch. "You want me here or not?" Edward tilted his head, a flicker of something unreadable in his gaze. Then he gestured to the chair across from him. She didn't thank him, just sat. No handshake, no warm welcome. Just the job. That was fine by her. Before she could speak, the door opened again. A woman stepped in, shoulders sharp, tablet in hand. Her hair was tied back tight. Her smile wasn't one. Natalie Griggs. Alicia knew her instantly, not just by the eyes, but by the way she scanned the room, measuring, calculating, like every space had a weakness she already knew. "Welcome to Holt Dynamics, Ms. Monroe," Natalie said, her voice smooth as marble. Alicia smiled back. "Oh, we're doing last names? Good to see you again, Miss Griggs." A flitter, barely noticeable, crossed Natalie's face. Then it was gone. "I've prepared your orientation materials," Natalie said, handing the tablet to Edward, barely glancing at Alicia again. "Would you like me to brief her on protocol?" "At Earth." Edward didn't look up. "No." "I will." Natalie nodded. Before leaving, she paused by the door and looked back at Alicia. "Good luck," she said. But it didn't sound like encouragement. It sounded like a warning. As Alicia sat, Edward slid a mirror across the desk toward her. It wasn't large, pocket-sized, but enough to catch her reflection. "I don't need that," she said. "It's not for you," Edward replied. "It's for them." He pointed toward the windows, toward the men in suits who would never see her as anything but a waitress in borrowed heels. "Before you walk into a room, decide what they'll see first, your face or your fire." Alicia met his gaze. "I don't play games, Mr. Kane." And Edward's voice was quiet. "Neither do kings. To stand in a room that was not built for you, yet refuse to shrink, is the beginning of changing everything." The mahogany conference table gleamed like a polished weapon. Alicia sat across from 3 men in suits that whispered wealth, tailored arrogance, cufflinks that probably cost more than her monthly rent. They didn't say much. Didn't have to. Their presence was an announcement. We owned the room, the air, the narrative. But Alicia didn't blink. She sat still, spine straight, palms down on the table, not folded, not nervous, rooted. To her right sat Edward Kane, watching in silence. He didn't speak, didn't interfere. This was her test. Across from her, Philip Langford. White hair, hawk eyes, old money in human form. He adjusted his tie slowly, like the motion itself proved power. "You must be the new one," he said, voice dipped in disdain. Alicia smiled politely. "I suppose I am. You'll learn quickly this business isn't about feelings." "I'm not here to feel," she replied. "I'm here to see what matters." A flicker, maybe amusement, crossed Edward's face, but it vanished. Langford leaned forward, fingers steepled. "We're moving production to Taiwan. It's cheaper, faster, more scalable. End of story." Edward spoke for the first time. "And what happens to the 3,200 American workers?" Langford shrugged. "They'll adapt, or they won't. That's not our concern." Alicia's pulse quickened, but her face didn't flinch. "You mean families?" she said, voice calm. "Not just numbers, people who built this company while you were flying first class." Langford chuckled dryly. "It's business, darling. Cold, simple, necessary." "No," Alicia replied. "It's lazy." The room tensed. Langford narrowed his eyes. "Excuse me?" Alicia slid a thick file across the table. Charts, projections, market analyses she'd worked on all night. "Here's what happens when you offshore. Labor savings are temporary. PR fallout is permanent. Customers notice, so do investors." Langford didn't touch the file. "You want numbers?" Alicia continued. "Read the last page. 10-year forecast. Your short-term greed costs long-term trust." Silence. And Yeti smirk from Langford. "You got fire," he said. "But you're playing poker with a pair of twos." "No," Alicia said, standing slowly. "I'm not playing." She reached into her blazer, pulled out a single Polaroid photo and placed it face down on the table. Langford raised an eyebrow, flipped it over. It was a photo of Micah, in his wheelchair, smiling, holding a paper heart that read, "My mom says I matter." Langford stared at it. Alicia's voice lowered. "That boy is watching everything we do. So are thousands of others. One day they'll sit where we sit, and they'll ask what we did when we had power." Langford didn't speak. Edward leaned back, eyes still unreadable. Langford extended his hand across the table. A gesture, a test. Alicia looked at it, then deliberately slid the Polaroid closer to him. "I shake hands with those who know what they're holding," she said. It turned and walked out. In the hallway, Edward caught up. "You weren't bold," he said. Alicia didn't slow. "No, I was clear." He stopped walking. "They'll try to cut you down for that." She turned, eyes steady. "Then let them learn how deep my roots go. Sometimes they don't fire you. They dare you. Quietly, efficiently, publicly." It started with a hallway, a cold one. Alicia had just stepped out of a client briefing, still clutching her notes, when Natalie appeared at the other end like a shadow, stretching against polished marble. "We have a problem," Natalie said. Her tone didn't waver, her steps didn't rush, but her eyes, those calculating eyes, gave it away. "What kind of problem?" Alicia asked, already bracing. Natalie didn't answer. She handed Alicia a printed email, still warm from the office printer. Alicia read the first line and stopped breathing. It was a company document, classified, confidential, and forwarded from her email address. The air between them thickened, grew metallic. Her heart slammed against her chest. "This isn't mine," she said immediately. "I know," Natalie replied, "but someone wants it to be." Alicia stared down at the page again, willing the black ink to rearrange itself into sanity. But it didn't. It stayed loud, accusing. She had been in enough rooms like this. She knew how fast truth got swallowed by doubt. And this time, she wasn't just a black woman in a room full of power. She was the threat. They brought her in that afternoon. The boardroom that once tested her now felt like a courtroom, silent, surgical, ready to cut. Edward Kane sat at the head, fingers steepled. Unreadable. Alicia placed the email on the table like evidence in a trial she didn't agree to join. "This isn't me." Edward didn't touch the page. "I want to believe that," he said. Her stomach clenched. "You want to?" He inhaled slowly. "This is a serious leak, Alicia. Millions in exposure, market volatility. You understand how this looks." Alicia leaned forward, her voice sharp. "I understand exactly how it looks. I'm the new one, the outsider, the black woman with too much fire and not enough pedigree." Silence. No defense. No denial. Not from a board. Her fingers curled under the table, nails digging into her palms. "Do you think I did this?" she whispered. Edward met her gaze. "No." But he didn't smile. Suspicion, because he knew something she didn't. As she left the boardroom, Alicia passed the glass hallway on the 39th floor, the one that overlooked the city. She stopped, pressed her palm flat against the glass. The city lights blinked beneath her fingers like signals she couldn't read anymore. Then, in one deliberate motion, she lifted her hand and made a small X on the glass with her fingernail. Marked, not just to herself, but to whoever was watching. Rain hadn't fallen, but the air was heavy, the kind of weight that came before something broke. Edward stood at the edge of the rooftop, overlooking the skyline. Alicia joined him, quiet at first. "You know what they're saying," she said. "I do." She folded her arms. "Then say something." He didn't look at her. "If I speak now, I lose the room, and then I can't help you." Her voice trembled, but not with fear. "So, you're waiting for the fire to spread before you put it out." Still, he didn't turn. Then Alicia said something she hadn't planned to say. "You saw me once, Edward, when no one else did. Don't unsee me now." That made him turn. His eyes, cold, calculating, finally softened. "I haven't," he said quietly. "Sometimes the only way to prove you didn't burn the house down is to follow the smell of smoke until it leads to the match." Alicia hadn't been sleeping, not really, but that night, she didn't even try. She sat at her kitchen table, knees pulled to her chest, as her laptop glowed like a ghost across from her. Her inbox was quiet, too quiet, the silence of sabotage. Outside, sirens wailed somewhere distant. The city was turning, as cities do, always on its edge. But inside her apartment, Alicia was still, an animal sensing the trap but refusing to freeze. Then came the message. "We need to talk. 9 a.m., sub-level. Come alone." In the sign. But she knew who sent it. Sub-level B. Dynamics, 903, Iowa. Natalie Griggs stood beneath flickering fluorescent lights, arms crossed, jaw tight. She was wearing all black, like this was a funeral or a mission. Eliza stepped out of the elevator with the tension of someone walking into a war zone without a weapon. "You came?" Natalie said. "You called?" There was a pause. One beat too long. Then Natalie handed Alicia a flash drive. "I ran a trace," she said. "On the email. The metadata doesn't match your terminal." Alicia raised a brow. "So, I was framed." "Framed carefully, Natalie corrected. The email was routed through 3 foreign servers. Whoever did this knew the system. Alicia took the drive, her hands trembling slightly. "Will you help me?" Natalie looked her in the eye. For once, no mask. "Because if they can bury you, they can bury anyone." Back in her apartment, Alicia sat in silence, the flash drive in one hand and a folder of her old resume, name tags, diner pay stubs in the other. One by one, she fed the papers into a metal trash can in her kitchen. Then, with a long match, she lit them. The flame crackled. Her own quote curled into smoke. Alicia Monroe wasn't going back. She watched until the last paper turned to ash. Holt Dynamics felt like a graveyard after 9 p.m. Empty glass halls, computer screens humming like ghost breath. Alicia and Natalie sat in a secured office tracing data lines across a screen. Click, scroll, freeze, click. Natalie said, pointing. The IP used the proxy account of an internal exec, Eric Calloway. Alicia's chest tightened. "He's been here for a decade?" Natalie nodded. "Exactly why no one would suspect him." Click. Scroll. Click. Bank logs, email headers, offsite backups, Natalie listed. "He's got a network and a pattern." "Planted it on me," Alicia whispered. And Natalie nodded again. "And we can prove it." Alicia stared at the screen, then at her own reflection in the dark monitor glass. Softly, almost inaudible, she whispered, "They chose the wrong woman. The difference between a scandal and a reckoning is whether you choose to stay silent." The email went out at 7:03 a.m. Every board member, every senior director, blind carbon copy. Attached a comprehensive file, dozens of pages detailing digital trails, IP addresses, internal access logs, money transfers, phone records, and metadata timestamps. Subject line: urgent, security breach, immediate review required. Enter Alicia Monroe. Co-signed, Natalie Griggs. No one replied, but within an hour, the entire 40th floor was in lockdown. 11:00 a.m. emergency board meeting. The boardroom was colder than usual, or maybe it was the weight of what hovered in the air. Langford was already seated, arms crossed, lips tight. Edward Kane stood, suit crisp, jaw set. Beside him, Alicia Monroe, calm, unshaken, holding the folder like a verdict. The room was quiet until Alicia placed the folder in the center of the table. "Before you make your decision," she said, "I suggest you look at the evidence." One by one, the men reached for the documents. Papers rustled, eyes widened. Langford's smile didn't crack, but something behind his expression did. And then she spoke. "You assumed I would fold. Because I was new. Because I was black. Because I didn't have the right name, or the right school, or the right skill. But here I stand. Here's the truth." The pages showed everything. Eric Calloway, 10-year executive, trusted by everyone. Until now. Digital footprints leading to his system, backdoor authorizations, transfers to offshore accounts, press contacts masked behind shell emails. He had planted the breach, blamed Alicia, nearly cost the company millions. But not today. Langford tried to interject. "This is premature." Alicia cut him off, her voice firm. "What's premature is how quickly you were willing to believe the worst about me." Edward's voice followed, cold, precise. "Effective immediately, Eric Calloway is terminated. Full legal action will be pursued." Calloway stood in the corner, silent, pale. He didn't even try to deny it. The room broke into low murmurs. Some nodded, some didn't know where to look. But Alicia stood tall, unmoved, because truth doesn't tremble. As she turned to leave, Alicia walked past the wall of awards, trophies, plaques, framed photos of white faces smiling behind silver lettering. She stopped. Then, in a move that stunned the room, she reached for one frame, an old picture of the founding executives, and pulled it off the wall. The glass cracked, but she didn't flinch. She handed it to Langford. "Fix this wall," she said. "Start by putting people on it who actually earned their place." Then she walked out. Not all victories are loud. Some just begin with standing in the room you once weren't allowed to enter. The building didn't feel the same anymore. Not because the walls had changed, but because she had. Alicia walked through the halls of Holt Dynamics with a different rhythm now. She didn't rush. She didn't flinch. Eyes that once darted past her now paused, now followed, now remembered. 2 weeks had passed since the boardroom explosion. Eric Calloway was gone. The PR team had carefully repackaged the fallout as a restructuring decision. Edward didn't smile about that. Neither did Alicia. But they both knew real change rarely made headlines. It built slowly, like roots. Denoclog AYEM Office of Corporate Strategy. The new brass plate on the door read, Alicia Monroe, Vice President Strategic Ethics. Inside, bookshelves, sunlight, and a desk that no longer felt too big for her hands. She sat with Natalie across from her, reviewing a new mentorship initiative, one that prioritized hiring from underserved neighborhoods. Alicia tapped the corner of the file. "We don't just want them at the table," she said. "We want them to know the table's theirs too." Natalie smiled. "You know, a year ago, I would have called this impossible." Alicia smiled back. "That's the best kind of start." Later that day, outside Holt Dynamics, Alicia stepped out into the sun. Waiting at the curb was Micah, now in a sharper wheelchair, his legs draped in a fresh navy blanket. He waved wildly. She laughed. "Micah Kane, you're too loud for a tech executive's son." "I'm not in tech," he grinned. "I'm in revolution." She knelt beside him. "How was school?" He pulled out a piece of paper. A B+ on a science test. "Almost an A." She kissed the top of his head. "We'll aim higher. Always." Then Edward approached. Still stoic, but softer now. He watched the two of them for a moment, a child and the woman who fed him, and said, "You didn't just change this company, you changed him." Alicia looked at Edward. "Now," she said, "he changed me." That night, long after the office lights had dimmed, Alicia walked back up to the 39th floor, alone. She passed the wall where the founding executives had once hung. In place of the shattered frame she had removed was a new one. This time, a photo of an all-company town hall. Centered. Alicia, arms folded. Behind her, interns, janitors, junior engineers, front desk staff. It wasn't just her face. It was everyone's. Below it, a bronze plaque read, "Because dignity is strategy." She stood there for a long time, then reached out and touched her own reflection in the glass, and whispered, "You earned this." It wasn't a headline. It wasn't applause. It was Alicia Monroe, standing alone at a bus stop at dusk, holding a folder pressed to her chest, watching the light turn gold over the city she once thought would swallow her whole. That quiet power, the power to still be standing, didn't need recognition, it needed breath. And Alicia breathed deep, because this wasn't just survival, it was becoming. The days that followed weren't glamorous, but they were steady. A new policy signed, a junior intern hired from the Bronx, an anonymous scholarship launched in Micah's name. Small steps, but steps that mattered. Racism hadn't vanished, power still tilted rooms. But someone like Alicia had stepped into the frame and stayed. In life, we're often taught that justice comes in loud victories, but more often it arrives in quiet resistance. It comes when someone like Alicia Monroe refuses to be erased, when she feeds a child in the rain without asking his last name, when she stands, not because she is unafraid, but because she is needed. We grow old carrying memories of what we've lost, but we grow wise when we choose to remember what we stood for. This story isn't just Alicia's, it belongs to everyone who's ever been doubted, silenced, or told they didn't belong. Let this be a reminder: dignity cannot be given or taken. It is claimed in silence and in storm, and it leaves behind roots that will grow long after we are gone. If this story moved you, we invite you gently but earnestly to subscribe to Unheard Racist Stories. Share Alicia's story, not for spectacle, but for change, because when we carry these truths together, society bends closer to justice. Thank you for walking with us. Your presence, your time, and your listening heart make all the difference. We hope you'll stay with us for the next story, for the next voice, for what still remains unheard. With care, always. Unheard Racist Stories.